My name is Ann Smith, and I'm a volunteer for the Samuel Oral History Program, Samuel Proctor, at the University of Florida. And today's date is August 19th, 2015, and we're at the History Museum in Cedar Key, and I'm interviewing Waylon Wadley. Did I say your name right? And you told me it was all right to call you Waylon. Tell me when you were born.
8/1/23.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born on Cedar Keys. The same house, still together that I was born in.
Now, the way we're going to do this interview is that I am here to talk to you about your experience as a veteran in the service.
Okay.
And so we'll kind of jump ahead, and then when we're finished, Dr. Andrews will ask you about growing up in this area and later on. How's that? Tell me how you first knew that we were at war. Did you hear people talking about it, or?
See, I didn't graduate until 1942, and the war started in 1941.
Yes.
So it was going on for a couple of years before we even thought about anything.
Right, right.
We would go around and collect old pieces of metal or anything we had, and we would send it to some place, and they said they were sending it to the Japanese, and the idea was that they would shoot it back at us. So that's just scrap.
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't sound like a good plan.
But see, I'm 42 was when I graduated. So it had been going on quite a while before that.
Had you thought about going into the service?
No.
How did that happen?
Well, I had a brother who lived in Detroit, Michigan, and I wanted to go see him after I graduated. So I went up there to Detroit, and I was at Detroit and just hanging around, and he says, "Why don't you find you a job? They're hiring a lot of people at these aircraft factories." I said, "Well, I'll try that." So I got a job at the Briggs Aircraft Factory in Detroit. And from there, I was called into the service. And I went to boot camp at Great Lakes Training Center.
Did you? How was that experience?
Well, the thing of it is, all the employees at the aircraft factory was women, and I enjoyed that.
Shall I ask you any more details?
The lady that I worked with, she was called a riveter, and I was called a booker. So we worked together good.
Well, how was it? Had you ever been up north?
I had been there, but not to have a job.
Yeah. Was it hard work?
No. Just riveting is an easy job, but you have to watch what you're doing.
Sure.
So.
Well, now, when you went to Great Lakes, what was the date that you were inducted into the service?
I would have to look at some books for that.
Okay. Tell me what year.
Well, it would be 42.
Okay. And what did you do when you got to Great Lakes? Did you have boot camp? And
well, boot camp training is a little bit of everything. They march you around the field with a rifle, a wooden rifle above your head, and they make you jump off of a big high platform to see if you could swim. And it's different things that they think you would need when you got aboard ship. So.
And you joined the Navy?
Yeah. I had a choice of either joining the Navy or the Army. So I chose the Navy.
Why did you choose the Navy?
Well, I guess it was just the fact that I was around water. And I didn't have no troubles trying to find out what I wanted to do.
That makes sense. Well, now, did you find boot camp difficult, the physical conditioning? Or
No,
were
I
you...
did not. I went through it just fine.
Yeah, yeah. And so after you finished boot camp, did you stay there or were you transferred?
Well, they put us on a train, and we went to Seattle, Washington. And from Seattle, we caught a ferry boat to Bremerton, Washington.
Yes.
And that's where the West Virginia was in dry dock. And we got there, and we found out that's the ship that we was going to be assigned to. And we slept on a converted ferry boat. And it had just the bunks that we was going to use. But we ate at a different building on the land. But we had, our job was to do anything they could find for us to do.
Yeah.
We chipped and chipped paint down in the holes of that ship. And it was pretty dirty.
I bet.
But other than that, it wasn't too bad. But the place where we ate was on land, and we had good food. So.
And so the hull that you were working on and chipping the paint, was that the West Virginia, or
Yes,
was
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now they didn't. We didn't paint. The contractor painted. So when we got it chipped, everybody had an air gun, and you get down in one of them holes with about 5 of them air guns going, and it's rough.
I bet.
But we was glad to get through and get out of there.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really that bad.
How long did that go on?
Well, I would say maybe 2 or 3 months. The rebuilding of the West Virginia, it was sunk in Pearl Harbor.
I was going to ask you if you knew what had happened to it.
Yes, it was sunk, and they raised it in Pearl Harbor and put it in dry dock and got it fit enough that they could bring it to the States. Well, they brought it to Bremerton, and I understand that there was about 4 more ships that they all looked just alike. They used the same pattern to bring them back to life. So I was assigned to the 4th Division, which is the number 4 turret, and that was my job. The master of arms that was in charge of us, he looked at me and he says, "You're going on the shell deck." I says, I didn't say to him, but I said, what's the shell deck? But I found out later on. But after they got the ship ready, they took it for trial runs. And we went up and down the coast just for trial runs. And we'd come back in at night. And we had liberty. Then we go back out the next day. You want me to go on from there?
What was your job? What was your part then?
Well, my job, other than manning a broom, was I worked on the life rafts.
What did you do?
They had the life belt rafts had to be scraped and painted, and otherwise they would rust. And that was my job, to keep them fit. But the crew, most of the crew was in the deck force. They manned their brooms, and they had a clean sweep down every morning and afternoon. So I didn't get into that part.
Did you start making friends? Did you have buddies by that time that you knew and had worked with?
Well, I began to learn who they was. There's a lot of people I didn't know, but the one that was in my section, I knew them pretty well. But there was none of them that lived in Florida. Every one of them was all up throughout the states. So I got to know them pretty well. And the bunks that they had was 3 bunks high. And my bunk was in the middle bunks. And if a man had ground itch or athlete's foot, he would scratch it on the chains. And you know who had ground itch. So,
those are the details that weren't in my history book. I never knew that before.
But when after you got up, then the bunks were pushed up, and they were not pushed back down until nighttime.
Yeah.
So it was kind of crowded, but we got along all right.
Well, how long did it take to get the West Virginia seaworthy?
Well, it was, I'd say probably they okayed it in 2 months. We did a lot of running, and we went down to Long Beach. And Long Beach is where we went out and tested all the aircraft guns. They would send out a little boat with us, and they'd have a kind of a airplane that they set off, and we would shoot at that.
Yeah.
The 16-inch was not fired, but all the aircraft were fired. The 20 millimeter, 40 millimeter,
Yes.
and the 5-inch were all fired. And they were pretty well tested.
So then you were planning ahead to go when you anticipated that maybe you would go to Hawaii from there?
Well, we didn't really know where we was going, but we kind of featured that. So we left Long Beach, and before you get to Long Beach, before you get to Pearl Harbor, you cross the equator, and that's where all hell broke, because you was called a pollywog before you cross the equator, and after you get initiated, you're called a shellback. Now, to go through that is really a deal. First, you go through the belt line, and then we had noticed quite a while before that they was building a big tank up on the bow of the ship. We didn't know what for, but we found out later on. They filled it full of water. Then you go through the belt line, then they dunk you in that water. And when you come out of there, they had a big fat master at arms that was sitting up there, and they spread all this stuff on his belly and then pushed your head into it. It's mayonnaise and everything that was nasty. So we got over that, but it was quite an ordeal.
Now, you mentioned the belt line. What was that?
Okay. You have a line, a walk place that you could go through, and there's men on each side of that with a belt or a board or anything they can get to hit you with.
That's what I thought.
And you get pretty well beat up when you get through that. But that belt line was what everybody kind of dreaded, but it worked out all right. But then they put you in that big tank of water, and I think they tried to drown you or see how much water you could take. But when you got out of that, that's when they stuck your head to the belly of that man with all that mess on it.
But then you were a shellback.
Right.
Congratulations. I'm so happy for you.
Well, they have all kind of stories in that book. Anybody wants to read it. But
quite a game.
We got to Pearl Harbor, and we had 2 or 3 liberties there. And but it really wasn't that interesting. We just went to the, most of them went to the beer hall.
Yeah.
And I didn't drink, so they had depended on me to bring them back to the ship. So, but it was a happy time. But we knew we was going to war.
Sure.
So we just took it in stride.
Yeah.
And,
well, now, were there other services there, waiting for their invasions or what the next plan was? Did you have other Marines or anybody else in the same area?
We left Pearl Harbor, and we went to this certain island where we stayed for a couple of days. But what they were doing were they were forming up an invasion force for the Philippines. And we knew that we was going to be part of that invasion force. So we did some more training there. We did shoot the 16-inch guns at that time.
I see.
But we left, I can't remember the island right now, but we left that island and went to the Philippines at Leyte Gulf.
Let me ask you, I kind of skipped over the part about how large your ship was. You were telling me how many men aboard.
Well,
what was the size of the crew?
The crew was about 1,900. That included officers, enlisted men. We had an aircraft bunch on there.
Did you have planes? Was it an aircraft carrier?
We had 2 planes.
2 planes.
They call them spotter planes. But they had pontoons.
Yes.
And they were made to land on the water.
Sure.
And in order to pick them planes up, there was a kind of well, it was I don't know what you call it, but it had cloth on the front and then rope on the back. And they towed that, and the plane had a hook on the bottom of the pontoon. And when it hooked into that rope, then the man on deck that was in charge of the piece that picked him up, and he picked him up and set him back on.
I see.
We had a catapult, and the planes were shot off with the catapult.
I see.
And when they wanted to bring one in, they put the ship in a turn, and in that turn, it smoothed the water so that that plane could land.
Had a place to land.
And then it came up and got hooked on that pad. Then they set it back on deck.
That's great information.
But we lost both planes
Did you?
at one time. The one time, well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but at one time when we were going down to get the ship's propellers fixed, see, we run aground at Lady Gulf
Oh, did you?
and bent 3 of the screws. Now they are monsters,
Yeah.
and but the 2 aircraft that they lost, they also lost the pilot and the man. So they was kind of lost without them.
What's the purpose then of those 2 planes when you say they're spotters?
Okay. They would take off, and and their job was to spot places where they needed us to fire.
Gotcha.
And when they called for us to fire, if it was really bad, they would use the 16-inch.
Yeah.
And if it was not too bad, they would use the 5-inch. Now, the 20s and 40s were mostly saved for air defense. That was when the suicide planes started to come.
Yes.
But they used, very seldom did they use the 16-inch.
Yeah. And again, your job, you were on the shell deck.
I was on the shell deck, and that's where the shells, 16-inch shells, were stored. And on that, at that location was one man on the telephones and myself. Well, he didn't do nothing but talk on the telephone. But it was my job to move those shells from where they were stored over to the hoist. And the night of the Surigao Strait battle, each turret fired, I think they fired 4 shells for each, 6 for each turret they had. 4 turrets, so that would be 16 shells. And the report was that out of the first 5 shells that were fired, 3 of them were on target. So, now that was after the Lady Gulf landings.
What battle did you say it was?
Surigao. I don't know how you spell it. Surigao.
S-U-R.
G-O-W.
I-G-A-O. S-U-R-I-G-A-O, I think.
Okay.
Surigao.
Surigao.
That was the Straits. And they had spotted these 2 battleships coming up from south. They figured they was coming from Borneo. There were 2 battleships with all of their destroyers, whatever they carried with them, cruisers. And when they got almost to the Philippines, they split. And that one battleship came to Surigao Straits, and the other one went north of Lady Gulf. Now, the idea was that at daylight, those 2 battleships would come together and hit the landing force, and they would knock out all of the ships that was in there. Well, they found out that we wasn't so stupid. So the South Force came through with 1 battleship, and they had several destroyers. and we went to, we got ready for them about, we went to battle stations about 2 o'clock because we picked them up on radar and we could see them coming through the straits.
And this is 2 o'clock in the afternoon?
No, that was at night.
At night, 2 a.m., okay.
And they had some PT boats that was down there first, and the PT boats spotted them and kind of give us some information. Then they run into the destroyers, and destroyers was kind of doing what they could to interfere with them. But they got, we started picking them up at 21 miles. That's the radar picked them up.
Gotcha.
And when they got within 15 miles, then we got the order to start firing. And each turret fired 8 shells. And those shells, when they go through the air, they look like a light bulb that's burning. And they said that this looked like a string of lights going out from the ship. Now, I'm just talking about the West Virginia. Now, there was about 6 other battleships that was in that line, and some of them, I think, were 14-inch. I don't know whether they fired or not. But anyway, they could see the battleship turn, and when it started turning, then we ceased firing. And the next morning at daylight, we got up and we could look down there. Now this was looking at 15 miles, and you could see the glow of where that ship was on fire.
Oh, really?
So, but the next morning, the planes finished it off, and they sunk it. So, but we came back, I think we went to some island for rest, and we had to go all the way down. We bent the screws at Lady Guff.
Yes.
We bent 3 screws. I would imagine this was kind of embarrassing to the captain. When he run aground, he wasn't supposed to do that.
That's not in the plan.
He bent 3 of the 4 screws, and they are big things. So they said the closest thing they had to put us in dry dock was down at what they call Espirito Santos. That was down in the New Hebrides, and that was quite a ways. So they sent us down there to go in dry dock. On the way down there, we just barely missed a floating mine, and that was kind of weird. Most of us didn't even know what a mine was, but that mine was just sitting there bobbling. But I understand you had to have contact with it before it would explode, but we missed it, and we went on and got in the dry dock. And that's where one of the pictures shows all the people coming up from down below and coming up on top to watch and see what was going on. So as soon as they got us fixed from that, we went back and we stayed at an island. When they say an island, that means they've already occupied that, and they took that from the Japanese.
How long did it take to get those screws repaired?
About maybe 2 days. But all 3 of the blades were turned in.
Oh dear.
And it took a tremendous force to turn those in. And but we didn't realize we was that close.
Sure.
Now, I'll tell you something that happened while we was at Lady Guff. We was there to furnish them with firepower.
Sure.
If they called us, we was there. And the natives, Filipinos, I guess, they started coming out. and they just filled that whole area. Now you can cross this off if you want to, but they wanted our fart sack covers. And we said, well, what is that? Well, that's the sheet off of your bed. And they wanted that to make sails. So we could trade anything we had to those people. And they just came out in droves. And also something else happened that I don't have no idea where they came from, but there was a speedboat that had 6 white women, all dressed in skimpy bathing suits. They went around and around each ship. Now, some of those people hadn't seen a white woman in ages.
Sure.
And they just hollered and hooped and made a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
But we went, we come back from getting the blades fixed on the propellers, and then we went in for what they call rest and relaxation.
Mm-hmm. And where did you go for that?
Okay, it was an island. The name of that island was called Mogmog.
Really?
M-O-G, Mogmog. And it was nothing but an island that had 6 baseball fields and a bunch of palm trees. And they give each one of us 4 cans of hot beer.
Yeah.
Now,
Oh, goody.
Now, some of them got drunk.
I bet they did.
And when you get a bunch of sailors off of this ship, they're going to start fighting with a bunch off of this ship. So we got back to the ship okay. But that was rest and relaxation. But we didn't have any more of that.
Well, now you don't drink beer, so your beer went to somebody else.
Yes.
A lot of the sailors do a lot of gambling. Are you a gambler? Don't gamble.
I was raised in Cedar Keys, and I wasn't allowed to do that.
That's right. That's right. It's not in your rest and relaxation.
That's right. That's right. So we went. We went from place to place. Mm-hmm. The Philippines. Every time they made a landing, we was there. Mm-hmm. And if they called on us to fire, we was ready to fire. And there were 2 or 3 places in the Philippines we landed.